Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are diving deep into Hacktivist Volume 1, also known as, I guess, the original Hacktivist series.
Yeah.
And
issues
frankly,
1 through 4, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, issues 1 through 4, but they restarted the numbering or something.
Volume 2 is just 1 through 6, so it is strange. So, I think we mentioned it last week. You can find the single issues, but this is one where it's much easier to find the trades because those are very clearly labeled Volume 1 and Volume 2 versus the single issues where you have two number ones, it's very weird. I don't understand.
And there's no one who's going to have the trades in stock. They can get it for you, but
so here's the thing.
Just walking through comic shops.
I don't know if they can get the for you. They may or may not be in print.
We both read digitally, so that should tell you something.
Yes, yeah. It is very much available digitally through any digital comic retailer or through your library or anything like that. And said I don't know if it's orderable still, but you can find it, in trade or in single issue, used bookstores, secondhand shops, things like that. But it's out there. But I think digitally is probably at this point the easiest way it's been collected. I was thinking, for some reason, I thought there had been like a one volume, I guess this would be like a compendium, with all 10 issues. I could have sworn that I'd seen something about that a couple of years ago. Maybe I was imagining it because I really thought there was one just like here's the whole story. Here's both volumes in one collection. I really thought that existed, but looking back to all the solicitations and publications, it wasn't there. It wasn't even something that I think was put out there and then pulled back. So I'm not certain where that came into my mind, but this feels like a book that very easily here's all 10 issues and just call it Hacktivist.
I think if reality had gone differently, that might be the case. Although I think actually the need for this book, this type of what if story, is more important now because of where things went.
I agree. This is another one that the book that becomes more relevant. It is weirdly prescient and in all the wrong ways. When we talked to Marcus Toe a couple weeks ago about, we touched on a little bit of the origin of this book, but obviously we wanted to get into Joyride, the book we had just finished talking about. The one thing I wish I could have asked him about was what was going on with this publishing schedule specifically for Hacktivist, because I think one thing we talked about with Joyride, right? We mentioned a bunch of times that first issue says number 1 of 4. And then by issue 2, that went away. So the idea that the book starts out with a 4-issue story, and that's what you're going to tell. And that was very, very much Boom's kind of strategy at the time. Here's 4 issues or 3 oversized issues, and this is the story you get to tell. And if it hits, it can turn into an ongoing. So I'm curious what happened with Hacktivist, because obviously we get 4 issues for this volume 1, and then it obviously ends on a somewhat of a cliffhanger, I guess. It could have wrapped the story up, it could go on, but then you get 6 issues for a volume 2. So what was the choice to make that a new number 1 versus just, here's issue number 5?
Yeah.
I'm just curious what went into that, and at what point did they know that they were going to continue? Because I know one thing I just put up here was, again, the publishing schedule for these books. Volume 1 went from January to April 2014. And then volume 2, which we'll talk about next week, was July 2015. That's when that first issue came out. So they didn't go based on that schedule. It's not clear that they would have gone directly from volume 1 to volume 2. So there might have been a break. I don't know what else these guys are working on, and then they came back to it.
Okay.
Or if they knew it was a break. I'm curious as to when those announcements came through and how that may have affected the end of volume 1. What'd you find?
Okay, so my best guess, and this was just me spitballing here, they did the original 4 issues, and the first issue it's got the publication of January 2014, which means the whole thing was done in 2013 in order to be, published in January 2014. And I think they were probably like set with Archaea Entertainment for issues 1 through 4. And then when you switch to volume 2, it still says Archaea Presents, but it doesn't say Archaea Black Label. And in the bottom right corner of issue 1 from volume 2 says Boom Studios 10-year anniversary. So I think Boom Studios was like, well, we've acquired Archaea now. You're restarting the series, so we're going to get a Boom Archaea #1 versus an Archaea Black Label #1. That's my best guess. And like, it doesn't really make sense, but that is comic publisher logic.
I mean, I could see that, but also, I mean, I don't know.
Because when they published the second one, they had definitely acquired him.
Well, they had acquired Archaea right before.
It was like June of 2013.
Yeah,
which would be probably right after they greenlit the first 4 issues.
Yeah, this book would have been in process of being conceived and worked on. So I mean that could be. I mean, it all came out on Boom. It is. But then, like, why not just call it like Hacktivist 2 #1, which is clunky and weird. Which right. But that's at least distinctive from the first volume. So I don't know. These are process right. questions.
Or if it were called about.
Hacktivist : something.
Hacktivist : the tower, or something like that.
Hacktivist Returns, Hacktivist Forever, Hacktivist and Robin.
Activist Begins.
Yeah, but it would be Hacktivist. It'd be like Hacker Begins and like
yes.
But some sort of delineation.
The Dark Activist.
The some sort of delineation between the volumes is usually helpful, even if it's clunky. But I mean, I get the sense though, because like when you we'll jump to the end of volume 1 here. It's the kind of ending where if that were the end of the story, I think you can think you're satisfied with that and you don't need to get more. There obviously is more and there's or potential for more, but
I've got absolutely no issue leaving volume 1 where it was.
Yeah. But I also have no issue with them picking up and following that thread further. It's that kind of ending. I think it works in a way where it's a fulfilling ending, but it leaves you thinking about what could be next, but you don't have this burning desire of like, if I don't get the next story, like I'm gonna downgrade this book because I'm left on such a cliffhanger.
Right. It's definitely not that. In fact, I think it is very impressive how much ground they covered and how cleanly they did it in a 4-issue series.
Yes, there's a lot. There's a lot packed in these 4 issues. But
they did it, which is my favorite approach, really, no matter the length of the series, is keep a small cast.
Yeah.
Like, I was able to remember the 2 main characters' names, and then there's the CIA woman and the rebel woman, and that's basically all you need to know. Anyone else, just
pretty much it.
And everything else you just get from context. Also, I noticed a shift in coloring, which we should start talking about the story at some point. But I did notice that once. Now I do get them mixed up. Is it Nate that goes to Junisa, or is it?
It's Ed. Ed goes to Junisa. Nate stays back.
So when Nate stays back, there's that page that has him doing a press conference with the CIA woman right behind his shoulder.
Yes.
Extremely desaturated colors. Now I'm like, editorially, that could mean like he sold his soul, something else. But I also thought, is it possible someone was like pinch hitting on colors for a few pages here or there? But it just feels like it has to be an intentional, deliberate choice to say it's just going to look so different for these couple pages.
Yeah. Well, but I think that continues because what happens going forward is what I like to call the traffic filters.
Yeah. Which
You
was,
know,
yeah, of the
you know,
time.
yeah, which is like, everything back in San Francisco or the Your Life offices, everything's got a blue filter on it. All the shed, everything is blue, you know, and then when you jump to Tunisia, everything's yellow.
Right.
It's way if for those who haven't seen the movie Traffic, like everything in Mexico, like Mexico was yellow. That was Mexico filter. You put a yellow filter on,
I
that
mean,
means
and
you're
like
yeah,
extremely yellow. Like it
yeah,
was
yeah.
like
And the
traffic
scenes
really
and
dialed
the
it up
scenes
more than you
that were
needed to.
shot in Cincinnati had a blue filter on them. Like that was so it was, and every location had this very distinct, very overt, over the top filter. And not saying that was what they were going for here, but the idea that here are these very extreme, and I do think that page that you talked about, where that's after Ed sets off the explosion in the office and goes on the run. That's when the story splits. Is meant to be this dividing point, diverging point for how the book looks. I think that's meant to be intentional because you see
But
it
then the
then.
next time you go to the San Francisco office, it's getting light again, but that's when he's kind of decided to turn on the
Yeah, a little bit.
CIA.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
But
feel like
there's
he's coming back to life a little bit more and he gets more color.
and I think the maybe the a little bit of saturation just changed there, but you still have the same themes though. Again, all the walls are blue. Everything has that darker kind of not darker, colder, I guess, like blues and violets are that's cold, and yellows and oranges and reds are whatever. But you know what I'm that it
Yeah.
there's a sense that a feeling you get that is different, to the point when they do link up again right at the end, and you see their two, when there's a shot of them, quote unquote looking at each other
Yeah.
when Ed's on the rooftop in Tunisia, and Nate is in the server room. You can see how different they're shaded, how different they're colored, and that's what they've established for the previous issue and a half, in terms of how it's supposed to look, up until you get to, I'm seeing it as I flip through the end here. Yeah, I mean, then when you get to kind of the coda there, a lot of that blue is kind of gone, but he's no longer in the office there. So you do get some of the oranges and yellows and stuff, that you saw in the Tunisia portions. So
Yeah. All right. So story in general,
sure.
I'm not sure where to start with it. We're not a recap podcast, but I was almost like reading this so skeptically for the first half of it that I felt like this was just blatant propaganda from the Twitter guy who wrote the forward to the book.
Yeah.
Like this is how he sees himself. What a tool. And it's just like, wow, if you need a tutorial in how bad it's gotten and how skeptical and jaded and cynical we've become, nothing will do it more than having like the former Twitter founder write an intro to a comic about social media giants becoming like world revolutionaries and
Yeah.
power to the people and all this stuff. And yeah, I could feel that in myself, and then was very disappointed in myself for being so easily tipped over and being like, book is just propaganda.
Yeah.
But it's really not.
Well, I agree entirely, because I think the thing they do very well is that we have our two golden boys, right? We have Nate and Ed, the billionaire, secretly good guys. We see both of them fail. We see both of them, their hubris, and the things that we associate with those people now. We see them both fail, which is on some level encouraging. I think now when we read, at least when I read it this time, the thing that seems like a pipe dream is that in those failures, they have some level of empathy and self-awareness to be like, oh, other people can help as well. Other people have ideas too. Like being, that the idea of being humbled in that moment, to know
Right.
that you were trying to do the good thing. And like, that's the part that seems like the pipe dream now, that like, no, someone like this now, doesn't believe they fail,
Right.
They
Yeah.
can never think they can never think that they made the wrong decision, or went down the wrong path. So seeing both Ed and Nate in their respective parts of the story, come to that realization, and then find the the area of like the like a genuine place of doing good, you know
Right. Yeah.
to get to that realization, like that part is the fantasy now, that any of these people would have that level of self-awareness.
Right. Yeah. Yes, and I like that when they disagreed, when they had their kind of split, I was totally tracking with both parties. And I think that's a very difficult thing to write.
Mhm.
Because they come to Nate and it's basically like, hey, we know this was you. So either now you work with us or we bust you publicly.
Yeah,
And Nate's like, okay, I can spin this to Ed.
yeah,
I
yeah,
can make this work. And Ed's like, well, I'm not doing that. And it's like, yeah, why would you agree to do that after you've spent all this time, cloak and dagger, all this stuff, but
yeah,
then ultimately he trusts his friend,
yeah,
but doesn't, because he says like, oh yeah, I'll sign it without reading, but then
yeah,
is immediately taking off on his own mission.
yeah.
I was actually curious how it hit you that they chose to use a real country.
Well, not just real country, but real events. I actually had that question for you as well. Because they start in Tunisia, and they reference the street grocer, the vendor there, the one who self-immolated in protest of the government, which is historically, when you go back and look at the time frame, that was in 2010, I believe, and that is generally seen as the inciting incident for what became known, at least in the West, as the Arab Spring, which I like that they mentioned here, that was something that Ed said to, are we saying Serene? Serene?
Serene, yeah, yeah.
Sirine? Serene?
So my
I said
basic
Serene in my
phonetic,
head.
yes, me too,
Okay.
but my basic thing phonetically in any language but English is that each vowel will always make the same sound. Like
Yes.
if they
Yeah.
need a different sound, they use a different vowel.
Yes.
Whereas in
Unlike,
English,
yes.
it's like, yeah,
Crapshoot. Yeah.
every vowel flexes to every other sound.
So okay. So we're going with Siren. Okay. Anyway, but they have that moment there where Siren actually retells that story to Ed, and he says the Arab Spring, and she responds with, "That's what you call it. Those are your words," because there is some contention about that. But that is a real event. That is a real event that started and kicked off what became known as Arab Revolution, Arab Spring, whatever you want to call it. And so much of that story in real life was fueled by the idea that social media allowed people to gather and organize and set things in motion. How I felt about it is interesting, because I first read this book. I read this book after I read Joyride, because I came to Joyride and I was like, oh, what else have these guys done? So this would have been in like probably 2018, probably after Joyride was done. So maybe late 2017, early 2018. So a few years after this book had come out. And I think I remember at the time thinking like, oh, this is kind of like a newsroom situation.
Right.
I felt negatively. I felt more negatively about it in the moment of like, oh,
Newsroom was exactly my comp for it. And it's about the same time as the Newsroom.
well, yeah. So Newsroom was 2011.
Yeah, like 2011 to 2013.
And they were
But they
commenting
didn't learn
on
their lesson because,
yeah.
like season 3, they're doing the Boston bombing.
Yeah.
Marathon bombing, and I'm like,
they at that point they were pot committed. But so at the time I read Hacktivist, I was thinking about that, of being like, okay, like, so we're reframing real events, because like the idea of using real events that have actual meaning and weight in the world, and then inserting your fictional app and creators, and in some ways like taking credit for what came after, both the good and the bad. I don't know. It rubbed me kind of the wrong way at the time. I remember thinking that, and I hadn't reread this book since then, since we started doing it for this show, and reading back on it now, I was more forgiving of it. I think because of the distance from both when the book was published and the event that it's referencing, and it was more I was more forgiving of it, and because I can look back on it and be like, oh, okay, like I see what they're trying to do now, you know?
Yeah,
And
I think I would
and
even feel differently if it was like one of the writers was like, my parents came to this country from Tunisia, and you
yeah,
know, I feel some connection to the people there rather than just like someone else who sees it on the news and decides to like, and it's like, hey, here's my pitch meeting. Hear me out. What if radical revolutionary events were also run by white people? Like, what if we got positive credit for that? Well, like, what if there was a white hero in this story? And it's like, I think that aspect of it is really rough.
well, and I think they
And it's not that
comment.
hard to make up a country and just have everyone know what you're talking about,
Yeah,
but you're not saying it out loud.
yeah. Well, but I think there is some commentary on the fact that so much of actual revolution at the time in 2010, 2011, 2012, things like that, were running on platforms that were designed and created by white people in America. They were using Facebook and Twitter and things like that. They were using those forums. They were, and I think what this book commented on a little, what Hacktivist commented on a little that I kind of wish they had gone into more of was the idea of it was a scene when Cyrene eventually punches Ed because she has a realization of the Your Life app. She was like, this gave us an opportunity to organize and to demonstrate and do all these things. And then all of a sudden, all these other protests and demonstrations started popping up that we didn't organize. We had nothing to do with. Where did this come from? Who did this? And it's her confronting Ed about the fact that Ed was saying, yes, my algorithm saw all this and it created these groups. It decided to start organizing demonstrations and protests and things like that. And that is his, it's meant to be like his come to Jesus moment of like, you still need people to run this stuff. And I wish there was more, a little bit more into that aspect of like, oh, you guys are wanting to protest. We think that's a good idea. So we're just going to do that for you. We're going to automate that. We, the white people from the West, we can make that easier. We can make that more effective. And I think it's meant to show in that way that Ed is in the wrong for going that far. It's like that was a step too far. But I wish there was a little more exploration into that level of interference, I guess. I wasn't going to say interference
he
before.
owns it pretty quickly.
Yes,
but that's a 4-issue series, right? That's what you got to do.
Yeah, he owns it immediately, and ideally, I would have liked a little more struggle with that. I would have liked a little more from Cyrene's side of trying to really explain it. So, like, you gave us a tool to help us further our cause, which we used, and then you came in and usurped that from us. It's the same idea of like we're collecting user data, and then how many times is the word algorithm said in this 4-issue series?
Well, I mean, that's the like.
Yeah.
You can basically sub algorithm for AI and make
Yes.
this book for 2025.
Yes.
And that's the thing is like everyone saying algorithm in 2014 is now saying AI model in 2025, but they're still trying to do the same things. They're like, people were like my favorite, internet meme is when people are now talking about like, I thought when we had AI and robots in the future, we could get them to do like vacuuming and chores for us instead of like writing and art. Like that's the part we wanted humans to be able to do. And instead, for some reason, these geniuses have inverted it. And it's like, oh, so we still have to do all the drudgery of life. And now they get to do the enjoyable things that are human expression. Granted, they're still bad at it, but I suspect in the next 5 years, there will be like the first provocative piece of AI art, whether it's a script or a novel or digital rendering of art or something like that, where people have to stop and say like, oh, is that does this count as art? And I'm really not looking forward to that conversation. Like I'm already rolling my eyes, but it's coming. It's going to be a provocative New Yorker article, and you're just gonna have to grit your teeth and bear it.
Well, I mean, I know where I come down on that. The answer is no in my mind. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. And I think I don't think your timeline, I mean, hell, 5 years, your timeline might be long. I might take the under on that if I'm
That's
feeling
true. Although just
certainly
this
pessimistic
week,
on the day.
did you see that Apple published a study this week that they released, basically breaking down everyone's AI model, and they put it through like thinking tests and demonstrated that none of them are actually capable of thinking. It is memorization, regurgitation.
Well, yeah, and
And
that's
they were like, like they can't solve some puzzles that like early elementary school kids could because it's not actually intelligence.
and that's everything that's what every story about AI is, right? And this is why when anyone says AI created, it's all about what the input is, which means it's generating what it's been told. And the whole idea is, the robot uprising happens is when they have their own thoughts. That's the inflection point of every dystopian AI future is when that tips over into actual original thought. And I do think we're far from that. But, it is funny to read Hacktivist now. And again, because algorithm is it's such a trigger word now because of we understand what's being fed to us through every aspect, right? All the ads you get when you're watching something on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or whatever your feed is, you are getting some sort of tailored experience based on what the algorithm thinks you've been watching.
Right.
And to see it thrown around so kind of loosely in this book, and with the idea that in this case it is meant to in some ways be a positive thing. I think. I mean, Ed talks about it as like this is a way. I guess he sees it as efficiency. Like he can solve problems this way.
Right. Well,
Removing the human element, which I guess he comes to realize isn't totally. He realizes in about 2 panels that that's not the way you should go about things. But
which honestly, I appreciate it not being long and drawn out. Like you get in, you make your point, and this is. It's the difference between Anton Chekhov and I'm trying to think of the most like Tolstoy. It's like Tolstoy is this massive tome of a novel. Chekhov can hit you just as hard sometimes in a 9-page short story.
Yeah. Well, said I wouldn't have wanted more of that exploration in this 4-issue series, but if this had been, let's say, 8 issues from the start, like if the whole story, everything had just been 8 issues, that's a line that's a thread I would have liked to have followed more of. That idea of what does the programmer, the author, have to say about interfering, about the authorship of the algorithm that's jumping in and helping all these quote unquote revolutions and uprisings. What is the inherent bias that comes into these things. The idea of you're right.
Well, and I think that's the piece that still didn't really come out.
Yes, yeah. That is the one thread in terms of authorship in technology that I would have liked to have seen potentially more of. And I get though in 4 issues you're trying to get in, you're trying to get out, and I like the pacing of what we got. But as I think about some of these threads of like, oh, that would have been a neat idea to go down, or I would have liked more exploration of that. That's not exactly what the story is about though, so I get that. But it is one of the things that kind of one of the tendrils of story that I think about with this book.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a little bit of struggle, and I think this is admittedly a liberal bias, is to be anti big business, more pro government, and this book really flips the script of like it had a very libertarian vibe to it.
Yeah.
But libertarian of 2014, not 2020's libertarian.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
But I was like, oh, okay, so I'm just supposed to believe, obviously the U.S. government has done atrocious things, throughout the world. But as liberals who are always defending the government from conservatives attacking it, you're always trying to overlook and step around those things. So it's like, okay, like I can live with that, but now you're telling me there's these young billionaire bros who have discovered philanthropy. Like that would be like Bill Gates became very philanthropic, but not when he was like in the heat of like gaining his billions, like in his 20s,
Yeah, yeah,
30s.
yeah.
It was only after he was like, well, I did it. What do I do with all this money now?
Th- this would be Mark Zuckerberg in like 2008, 2000, 2010, maybe, right? When
Yes.
when when he was still in the ascendancy, when Facebook was in the ascendancy, it would have been at that point deciding to, yeah, become the thing that Bill Gates did at the end of his career. You're right. It is, it is. I've made everything, and I've actually stepped away from the company now. You know, it's like you founded a thing, but you stepped away from it, and then you discover philanthropy, versus what we're seeing depicted here, which are the people in their prime as they are still becoming the things they're going to be, doing the philanthropic work, going out there and in some ways, yeah, like risking it all, I guess. That's meant to be some
Yeah,
sort of
like
paragon of,
yes,
yeah,
right. I was like, I'm
yeah,
sorry, would Sean Parker have voluntarily died in a drone strike
yeah, yeah, yeah.
just to put it on the like rad move, but like I don't know these guys. I just know the archetype of these guys,
Yeah.
and I think that's the difficulty is like you have to fill in a lot of gaps from what we thought these people might be to what they ended up being.
Well, and I think this is where when we talked about last with the idea, if you can port yourself back and think about what you thought about someone like a Jack Dorsey in 2014, what you thought of someone like Elon Musk in 2014, it was radically different. It can be
Right.
tough to
I
look back and be
mean,
like, how some of these, how a lot of these people were like crazily hero worshipped,
yes,
you
crazily
know?
emphasis on the crazy
Yeah,
because
yeah, 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 yeah.
like you are just begging to be disappointed anytime you give someone just carte blanche to do say think whatever they want.
1,000%, 1,000%. But I think if you can cast your mind back to 2014, what we talked about last week was the idea that this is what we thought we could have had. And
Yes.
we were still in a place then to where we could fantasize this is what it could be, not just for our social media experience, but for the people in charge of it. This was the best case version of what that tech billionaire could be. Today's best case version is just not being a Nazi. Like the bar is so much lower. Just don't be
And yet
don't
the
be an
bar is
evil
still
person.
too high.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But back then, the bar could have been, the ideal could have been, you could do all this and you could be something greater. That's the idea. I don't think what they're saying is this is what those people were. It was a fantasy about the people we thought they could be. We can't even imagine tech billionaires now being like this. Like
Oh yeah.
that
That's
fantasy is so much a farce. It's so gone now. But in 2014, you could see that and be like, oh yeah, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be something if those guys were really the good guys? And now we're just like, that doesn't pass the sniff test, which is why I was thinking about this. Which is why I wonder why the adaptation of Hacktivists like never got off the ground. Because by the time
well,
it's
you
sold,
want to know how
yeah,
it's going to get off the ground now
it's
is
a different story
if
now.
well, but if Jeff Bezos ever found out of it, he'd be like, "Yeah, this is us." And it would be the most sinister version of this story,
I I
because
don't.
it would lose all of the complexity, and it would just be this hagiographic, like, see,
Yeah,
these billionaires, like, they need all this money because they're gonna fix all the problems.
yeah, yeah,
That him
I
doing that would be what Ed was doing and got corrected on.
yeah.
Of like, see, we just cut the people out of the process. We don't actually need them. We can fix this all without them.
Yeah, I can see him wanting that. I don't see someone like Alyssa Milano being like, yeah, we're going to do that for the story. Yeah,
You know what? I
I'll sign
actually
off on that.
had to
Yeah.
look up who Alyssa Milano was. I
Who's the
I
boss?
I didn't I've never seen Who's the Boss.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Um,
Okay. All right.
I just know the Community episode where Abed uh like takes the class on Who's the Boss and breaks the professor's brain.
You
Uh,
understand? You understand in Guardians of the Galaxy, that's why Star-Lord's ship is called the Milano?
no, never clocked it, never cared.
Okay.
Like there's so many Easter eggs to get in
It
there.
wasn't named after the cookie. It was off. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's literally not even that. Like, didn't even
Okay.
think of it. Like, I didn't think to care. I was like,
Okay.
never thought
Okay.
about it.
All right. All right.
But yeah, but that's the very small age difference between us.
Yeah, that's
Is
where it
that
shines through again. Yeah.
now? I believe that show was on after my cartoons, like on the same channel growing up, and I was like,
Maybe.
click, turn it off. It was like I don't know when was Who's the Boss, or yeah, it was like an '80s show, right? It was like that and Charles
Yeah.
in Charge, and all of the shows I didn't watch. I've never seen Cheers, so
I never saw Cheers either, so but I'm guessing you didn't watch Charmed either. That was
no, I
probably
didn't see Charmed. I only saw Friends because I was dating a girl who was into it after it was off the air, and she had all the box set DVDs. But like, I wouldn't have watched that in real time.
interesting. All right. But okay.
I didn't mean to just crush you.
Well, I wasn't. I didn't. I wasn't the biggest. I mean, I wasn't a watcher of Who's the Boss, but I'm aware of it and I've seen it and I know. I at least know who Alyssa Milano is. Didn't watch Charmed, but I've seen Charmed.
Well, like I
for
knew the
listeners.
name was a celebrity, but I like looked her up and I was like, I do not recognize this person. Yeah. Apparently, she's in Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger. That I would know because I have seen that once. But I'm guessing it had all the depth and complexity of a female role in a Schwarzenegger movie from the '80s.
Well, at that point, she would have been. She still would
kid.
have been a child. Yeah, she would have
Right.
been young at that point still. So
But that was always the Schwarzenegger thing. It's like you put him with
Yeah.
the kid, and
yeah, yeah.
and and everyone can get past the lack of acting on his part because they're so invested in him, protecting the kid. Yeah. Terminator 2, Last Action Hero,
Kindergarten Cop.
Kindergarten Cop. Yeah. Wow. We really just cracked open his career.
We did. We did. That's the secret. That's the
Yeah,
secret.
we saw that. I think we're done here.
There's one thing I wanted to mention from a presentation standpoint, I guess, and that is, I think what Darren Bennett did with the lettering specifically for foreign language is about as good as I've ever seen it done in a book. The way, because typically when foreign language is done in a comic, it's in brackets and it's maybe italicized and there's a little asterisk next to it and then a box that says in Spanish or
Right.
in Arabic.
Yeah, I did think that was cool.
The way they did it here, where they changed colors and then it simply said Arabic in Arabic as part of the word balloon. It didn't say French; it said French. It said that, and then that those are kind of the main two languages we saw. But then at the end, when this message goes around the world, we see like one shot in China, one shot in Russia, or whatnot. And to do that and do it with different colors, so it's visually very clear, but then also for each of those balloons to have the language in the language that's being spoken. I thought it was an incredibly cool touch. And it's a very smooth and easy way to tell you where you are, and you get that differentiation in storytelling. Which again, I guess when you're making your own book, you have the freedom to do something like that. Because, like I said, in a big two book, in a Marvel or DC book, like if something's in Arabic, you just get brackets and an asterisk in a box that says in Arabic, and you know that everything after that in brackets is in Arabic.
Right.
That's just how style. So getting to see what Darren Bennett did with that, and again how smoothly I thought it worked and how it looked, and visually it looks so cool. Just having that little bit as part of the word balloon, I thought it was so neat.
Yeah, it was very cool because normally, yeah, you're right. You're like you sometimes just have to rely on colors after being told what it is one time.
Yes. Yeah.
And that can be a little complicated when you go to like cultures where people are fluent in multiple languages and you
Yes.
can
Yeah.
switch in the same conversation.
Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes, because sometimes if you're in the middle of a book, you can, at least that happens to me sometimes, if characters or one character maybe is going back and forth between languages, you just don't read the brackets.
right.
And you can then be like, okay, so he's supposed to be talking Spanish to this person, but English to this person. And the person speaking Spanish isn't, he's translate, and you can bleed through like that sometimes. And if there's no other break other than just brackets, I think using different font color always helps. But then just that added step here of adding the language as part of, integrating that into the word, the word balloon itself. Again, it's an not infallible, but it's pretty close to it. Like it's almost a surefire way to know that this is a different language. The first time we see that with multiple languages, when Ed gets to Tunisia and he meets with Serene and she takes him to the professor. And he starts off in Arabic and is like, does he know I can't speak Arabic? He can't speak Arabic, can he? I'll tell him that no, he doesn't speak Arabic. And then he jumps to French. So you have the English the English balloons, the Arabic balloons, the French balloons with the different color fonts each way. Like there's no confusion there as to who's speaking to whom and who understands what, because it's so clearly defined. And I think stuff like that, I think there's a letter in the back of, or a note in the back of the trade from kind of the entire creative team. And it's something that Darren Bennett wrote in his about, he admits, the job of a letter is to be invisible, to not be seen.
Right.
And I think work like that, when you have multiple characters speaking in multiple languages and not everyone understands everybody else, to have where everyone's standing is clearly defined through just a handful of quick word balloons, quick phrases.
That's also shout out to Marcus Toe because in order, like, you have to portray the confusion even though you know the dialogue that will be in that box because you know who understands what and who doesn't.
And you also have to, you got to leave room for what you know is coming there,
And even if Ed says like, oh, I do speak French.
Yeah.
He still may strain a little bit more to like you have to concentrate more to hear something in something that's not your native language.
Yeah.
And by the way, like I don't think we've even said Marcus Toe's name other than like talking about the production stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this is fantastic work from Marcus
It looks
Toe.
beautiful. It looks beautiful.
I mean, it's just gorgeous. Like this is actually, I think there's like an era of art that's tied to this. Like if you like took all the text off and I didn't know what this book was and you were showing me like, here's the finished art, like what publisher and era would you guess it was from? I would say it was like somewhere in the 2005 to 2015 Vertigo Image type artwork, which is like, that's my bread and butter. Like many of my favorite stories are written in that era because I love this style art. And I'm not really sure, I'm not sophisticated enough to describe like what it is. Like you can get kind of a hyper realism to like very close big panels like when you need them. Otherwise there's an economy to it where like if you look at the backgrounds on certain things, it's just colors or textures or something like that. And I think you just don't get bogged down in studying the art on every single panel.
As you were saying that, I was flipping through and I came to exactly that. And I stopped on a page like that. It's towards the end when Ed and Syrian are on the rooftop, right? So he's on a rooftop. He's sitting on the ledge and his computer is on some ductwork or whatever it is, right? Like as a makeshift desk. And there are some times when the two of them, as you can see behind them, you may see some of the city. You may see some of Tunis. And then sometimes it's just a yellow background,
right.
Which like
even at press conference, it's like there's like
maybe
little
denotes
bullseye background type things.
Yeah.
Which was a lot of nightly news vibe for me. Like Hickman.
Oh yeah.
There were very few actual scenes. Yeah. It only showed up when it mattered. But if
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
just having a conversation, it's like I'm not going to draw the backdrop of this room 40 times,
Well,
for
it's like
5 pages worth of panels.
you know where they are,
Right. You
and is
don't
and
need it.
yeah, yeah, and but then every so often, maybe the camera will changes and you see it there, and then you get like a nice. Like a full splash. There aren't a whole lot of double splash pages, but you get
Okay.
like a nice full splash page, and you can see he's got the buildings and the people on the streets and all of that stuff there. So,
So let me ask you about something that makes me suspicious. And like, this is not casting aspersions because there's no right or wrong way to do these things. But I do wonder if this is the difference between people drawing physically with pencils and digital artists. I wonder if digital artists will draw a scene once and be able to kind of copy and paste that background and, tweak it and manipulate it. But like, you don't have to start from scratch every time you're drawing the backdrop of a room.
I think they can.
Which
I
is
think
why
they can.
digital art is often so much more detailed,
Yeah.
but sometimes because of that, more cumbersome to read. Not cumbersome, but it's slower. Like you spend more time on it because your eye isn't immediately drawn to the most important thing. And I think that's what I like a lot about a hand drawn art is like you can really tell where they spent the most time, and that's where your eye is supposed to spend the most time.
I can see that. So you get kind of like an infinite focus kind of problem in digital art, as you're saying.
Yes,
That like
right.
because you can see everything so clearly. I can see that. I can see that. But I
Like
think
this has more of a like the director had this style camera was shooting this way and the focus is clearly here and the background is clearly there because we're not even drawing the background in half the
yeah,
panels.
yeah. Well, because
And it's one
you
of those things you don't really notice unless you're
no.
like sitting here talking about it.
But I think this is why that works is because there are enough establishing shots. There are enough shots of
Yes.
them in the city. And also, I think this is where the color palette really works to them, why they did that. Because those scenes I was talking about of Syrian and Ed on the rooftop, the background's all yellow and kind of orangish and all that, which is just the color of the sky every time we see the city of Tunis,
Right.
That's how they've drawn it, and that's the filter over everything. So is that the sky? Is it just a wash, or is it just no background? It doesn't matter. It could be either. When you see those scenes and it's just the two faces, it's just the two of them.
Right.
Is it a camera angle that is looking at the sky that's kind of yellow orangish, or is it just nothing? And the point is, it doesn't matter because they've done enough work to establish where they are, and you already know where they are. So, as you said, your mind fills in. You don't need to be reminded that they're sitting on a rooftop somewhere. Like, you already know that. You know where they are and you know what the situation is because a few pages before, they showed people marching on the streets and kind of from a low angle and all that. And you saw what it was like in Tunisia. So yeah, you don't got to put those buildings in every single time. You don't got to draw them in every time. You don't got to fill it in and I don't want to say waste time, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Yes, I do because
It
I'm
might
very
be wasting
sensitive
time.
to this as
It
a
might be
reader.
wasting time as an artist. You might actually be wasting time if you did it every time.
Well, and if
Sometimes
you're
you need it.
wasting time, like time wasted for an artist is multiplied for the reader. Because the
Absolutely, yeah.
reader is trying to take in pencils, pencils, inks, colors, lettering, paneling, all of this stuff, while also trying to read. So I think there was this era of like the colors, like when we talked to Lee Lowridge talking about like the idea of Image Comics when it started was like we're not limited by this basic color
By four
palette
colors, yeah,
that
yeah.
Marvel and DC have been stuck with forever. And I think by the 2000s they were really humming like the colorist games were really taking off, and the artists were like right at the apex of like drawing this way. And like this is not like I have a like just for instance, I'm looking at the original art I have on the wall. One of them is a Jorge Jimenez Batman from 125, where everything is just insane detail and it's absolutely gorgeous. But every panel is like a still shot that you could like print off and hang on the wall, which I have done. And to its credit, not everything in this type of book is, and that's actually to me makes it a better reading experience, even if every panel isn't the same gallery experience.
Well, yeah,
Does that
it is.
like that
Yeah,
distinction make any sense?
it makes sense to me. Yeah, because I think what you said earlier about reader focus, about what is meant to be important here. Where's your eye supposed to go? What do you want the reader to take from this specific moment?
Right. It is like
If
this
that
is
moment,
storytelling art
yeah,
rather than it's
yeah,
not art in the abstract.
yeah.
Like
If the moment you want the reader to take away is how detailed that window in the background is, then you better make sure that window in the background is really detailed, you know? But if it's just meant to be that the characters are standing outside in front of buildings, then pull the focus to the people, not the buildings, you know?
right.
You don't need, just draw little half squares and,
Which is like and this is not a knock on him, but I found all of the Easter egging in top 10 from Xander Cannon like incredibly disruptive to my reading. Which it's supposed to be. It is
well, yeah,
written to be that way.
the same way with the Flintstones we talked about
Right.
with Steve
Steve
Pugh's
Pugh.
art is that they put stuff in the background there, maybe not to draw your eye the first time, but maybe the second or the third time to draw your eye. They want you to go and see all these jokes and all that stuff there. That is important to the story. Maybe not as important as the overall message, what they're saying there, but they're putting that for a reason. You can see that for a reason. And so you're right. I think what you said, I glossed over what you said, but I think you're perfectly right. Art for storytelling purpose versus art for gallery purpose.
Yeah.
And those things are not the same, nor do they need to be. Sometimes they can be.
Right.
It all
There's
depends on what the
occasionally
story is.
great overlap for a splash page or something.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think
When the
that's
whole
what
point is, look how cool this is,
right.
And but
I think there are a lot of Kickstarter comics where the writer is like either too timid with the artist or the artist is just too green, where it's like they are fully capable of drawing gorgeous things, but everything they're doing is like a pinup rather than storytelling.
it's because they want to show how good they are. Look how
Right.
beautiful this is, versus
How does it serve the story?
yeah, what's happening? Tell it. Sequential art is different. It has moments where you can, and those were splash. You're right. Splash pages are for that. Big splash page. You want to flex. You want to show how gorgeous this is. Great. But when you got to move panel to panel, when you have to move your reader's eye, yeah, there's no reason. There's no reason to spend time drawing things that don't matter. I hate saying that, because it all matters on some level. Otherwise it wouldn't, otherwise
Right.
the artist wouldn't
But
have
I also think this is the difference
they're
between
degrees. They're
comics and
degrees.
other mediums. It's like
Yeah.
if you are in if you're watching The West Wing or something and they sit down in Leo's office and start having a conversation, you can't do quick cuts in the conversation where there's just a black or solid colored background behind them
Yeah,
for a
yeah.
couple shots because it's extremely jarring. Comics, you don't know. Like you don't notice, it doesn't matter. And I think that's one of those things where it's completely distinct to this medium, and that's why I love it. And I get a little sad that I feel like people have moved away from it, and I'm sure someone listening can like comment with 400 examples in the last year of, people that have done like when a new style comes in, we're in a world where it doesn't replace the old style, it gets added to the pile.
Yeah.
And there are trends and there are fads, but there are plenty of people still drawing this way.
Oh yeah, no, it's all about effective storytelling. You're right. It's what it comes down to is what you're doing, serving the stories, working with the writers and the colorists and the letterers. Are you giving them room to put the text on the page? How are you moving the reader's eye down and across the page? Where are you pulling their focus? Are they looking at the things that you want them to find important? Or are they simply gazing off into the background because you drew a really cool car back there?
Right.
And if that's what you want them to do, then that's what the focus is. But if you drew that, and you put that back there because you like drawing cars, but you the scene is actually about the people in the foreground who are talking about something important, but you just were hyper detailed on that car. Like, what have you done? What have you done that is beneficial to the story? And hopefully, as the industry, as we've gotten more people in, and more people who have like gone to school for this versus like shown up and learned on the job, I think we're seeing that as we see third and fourth generation people come into the industry who have grown up reading this and then gone to school for it and all of that, and just have a better understanding of it, and also know that they are freer to draw their style.
Right.
Versus being forced to draw some other house style. So the farther we get into the industry, I think we see more and more of that, because
that's draw your style, have a style.
Well,
Like, I mean, so much of the goal for so long was to be
have a style and trust your style. Yes,
like conform.
Yes. Yeah. That you're allowed to have one, and you can cultivate that, because you've now been reading books drawn by other artists who were allowed and encouraged to have their own style, versus the books that those people probably read, little more conformity there. They were probably the first group allowed to break out. That's kind of started. It started with the Image guys, but the Image guys were just drawing the same superhero stuff early. So it came like the next wave of Image guys, late 90s, early aughts kind of stuff, into those Vertigo books. And when those styles then started to creep back into Marvel and DC, then you have books like Boom and things like that allowed artists to do this stuff. And it just perpetuates that people who grew up reading those books now are drawing books today. And you just get better stories. That's what it comes down to. You get better stories.
All the way around. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
So, I mean, what did you think of the self-sacrificing? And like, I've basically said everything I have to say about this book, except that I don't know, like, people, it almost seems naive to assume that, like, once people see what's happening in an untarnished way, it will change their minds, when we have so much evidence, especially now, to the contrary, of like, people are going to see whatever they are inclined to see. Like, you could show half this country right now videos of mothers being ripped away from their screaming infant children, and half the people will see a human tragedy, and half the people will see like law and order, or so they've got some framework where they will just interpret an atrocious event.
I didn't have that in my notes, but you're absolutely right. This whole thing hinges on, if
they knew, they would act. And and it's like,
Ed
but
is
I know
live
that's not
streaming
true.
this. He's live streaming this, and the CIA lady, she is trying to stop this because she's afraid of what would happen if people saw this for real. Right. If they saw the quote unquote truth. She's afraid of truth, which now, in a lot of ways, truth has unfortunately become irrelevant. That's another way that this book,
aside from the proper noun app. Which,
yes.
Which
has further degraded the idea of what that word is.
Right.
But you are totally right about that. That actually everything about this book, not just that moment, but how does Ed kind of make up for what he's done? Is he puts out the video, right? The one that Serene had took of the professor being assassinated, being shot and killed. So the idea of putting out, here's what actually happened. Here is what was said, what happened. You put this out there, people see it, and you're like, oh my God, this is real. This is what happened, and they believe it. And that changes. That forces action. That concept is just gone from the world, from enough of the world to where it's rendered basically moot. And that's really, really depressing and discouraging in a lot of ways. And it is one of the bigger points of bigger things that date this book, I think. The idea that seeing an objective truth was something that we still thought the world could do,
Yeah. Well, and I think that type of thing, it does go in cycles. I'm
I
not
hope so.
I'm not so cynical because you can go back a couple hundred years or a few hundred years or 1,000 years, and there have been times where it feels like, well, people just don't care about what's true anymore. They're, too blinded by their. But I think the distinct thing now is people have chosen the reality they exist in, whereas in the past it was always overlords choosing for them. It was like you only had access to what you had access to, and if your government was controlling your country's newspaper, you would only hear that narrative. Now you can access any newspaper in the world, hear any narrative you want,
And
and people are
actively
still
decide.
choosing. Right?
That's a good point. That's really good. And that is true. Yeah, you're not being fed one thing anymore. You're choosing. It's a buffet, and you see everything that's there, and you're taking the thing that you want, actively ignoring everything else, versus just someone scooping something onto your plate.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Which is
and
which
now you're
is
like
a lot scarier
force
now.
feeding
It's
yourself manure.
yes. Yeah.
Like
yeah.
instead of it being served to you as the only option, you are
Yeah.
going out of
You're
your way to
choosing
choose
that
it,
one. Yeah.
which
yeah.
is it is darker in that way because
way darker, but absolutely right. Absolutely right. The idea that we have lost that idea of society at large seems to have lost any idea of discourse. You know, there's nothing wrong with having a side. I think what's wrong is then never considering that the other side. I don't know what I'm trying to say there. You know, like having an opinion isn't the problem.
no, it's letting that opinion determine
Yeah.
what is true rather than basing your opinion on what's true.
Yes, that's very good.
Because there there can be a true fact and there are two different ways to view that fact, but we're still interacting with the same piece of information between us.
Yes.
And now we have lost that.
Yeah.
So it is just two opinions dealing with literally on the first day of the Trump administration, an alternate set of facts.
Yeah.
Like that was the tagline from the ominous inauguration
Speak. Yeah.
in 2017 was like literally the first press conference from the administration introduced the concept of we were working with alternate facts. I think is the exact quote. And it's like, my God, if that didn't set the template for the next 10 years, I don't know what did.
Yeah.
But there has to be a way through this. And I would love to see this team come back together and give us Hacktivist Part 3, assuming let's say 2014, all of those events happened, but then the backlash was everything that's actually happened in the real world. What would your altruistic tech billionaire do now?
Yeah.
Give us that character again in our current world. And I say this comp a lot because it's probably the best Marvel movie ever was Winter Soldier. Like the challenge they had to overcome was, well, we got this character from the 1940s who always does the right thing. He always does the right thing. And then you drop him in the 20-teens and it was like, oh, there is no right thing anymore. Yeah. Like this is a post-right thing world. Both sides are dirty. What does the guy who always does the right thing do when the right thing is so murky? Yeah. And it was the perfect beat for the character. And that's what I would like to see this especially after he watches Ed sacrifice himself, which we'll get more of, obviously the story continues.
Yeah.
But does that push him more to Ed's side, or does he think, Ed, that idiot? Like, what was he thinking?
Yeah.
We could have done so much more than just one country if he had just found a way to survive.
Yeah. Is it the idea of, yes, we know we're working quote unquote with the bad guys, but is there more good you can do working within the system and trying to keep reins on it versus being opposed to the system? I think that's what they looked at a little bit here in this volume. But yeah, it would be fascinating to follow these characters as if our world progressed with social media the way it has, if it did in their world too. I'm with you. This idea of who are these characters? Who are these people who would have been Ed and Nate of your life in 2014, their world, if everything that happened in our world happened in their world, and this 2025 is 10 years later, what are those tech billionaires like now? Does one of them become Elon? Does one of them bail out yet?
Or introduce like the Elon, like like introduce like, hey, we're not saying all tech billionaires are good. Like these are the 2 good ones.
You know what?
Here are 10 awful ones.
That's
and they're all different kinds of awful.
That's actually what the follow would be, because what happened in real life, Jack Dorsey sold Twitter, right? So what?
Right.
So
yeah,
the follow up here would have been someone comes in, buys your life. These guys go off, and then the person who buys it is terrible, and then they have to come back and then save the company. That's probably what it would be. It'd be something like that, because he has gone and ruined the world with what your life used to be. It'd be something along that nature, but it would be fascinating because, again, we've changed so much. The world has changed. Society has changed. Our relationship to social media has changed. And our ideas of what is possible and what we think is possible and what we want out of the app is different. It's so radically different than it was 10 years ago. Coming back to that, because there is so much like hopefulness in this book. There's a Pollyanna rose-colored glasses look through the world, that
I mean, it
things
has
could
like
be this way. And we just don't have that anymore.
I think it has almost like a West Wing style hopefulness. Like, do you remember like season 7 of the West Wing, right?
Yeah.
Who is the guy who comes in and offers CJ the job? He's a billionaire who's like, I'll give you $1 billion to go. He has said like, what could you do to change the world with $1 billion? And she was like, highway system in Africa.
Roads.
And he's like,
roads.
Yeah. He's like, I'll give you $1 billion to do it.
Yeah.
And
it's like
it's a fictional guy, because it basically has to be.
Yeah, but you're right. There is an earnestness underlining this story, that this was something to strive for. And it's still a fantasy, but it seemed to be attainable. It seemed realistic, that this is what we could have, this is what it could be. And we're so far from that now that it makes for an interesting read now than even it did when I first read it, in like 2018, 2019, something like that, which was only a few years after it came out initially.
Right.
We had changed a little at that point, but not a lot, not enough. And now we're like so far over the edge. This looks like a dinosaur. This is a relic of a story, and it's barely 10 years old, not even 10 years old.
Yeah, but if you were 14 right now and you were following this podcast and you picked up this book to read it, you'd be like, where in the hell did this come from? This might as well be Star Trek. Like, I mean,
yes, there's that much disconnect. Yeah.
And Star Trek was always like that too. Star Trek was very optimistic of like, we set it so far forward that surely either people would be extinct or they would have figured this stuff out by now.
Yep.
And they figured it out. It was the most hopeful version of humanity's future.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of what they've done here. And then you find out that Marcus Toe's a big Trekkie.
Well, yeah.
Right?
Well,
like
they
shocking
all are.
stuff.
Well, they all are.
Right. Well, yes, they all are.
Lance and Kelly and Toe, they bonded over Star Trek.
There is this optimistic, like, look what we could be. Look what we could have done.
Yeah.
And still could do.
I don't know if they can do the cynical side there, but it's always going to be undercut, I think, at least in this case, especially early in their career here, that there is this hopefulness to this book that I think you're going to see erode as we go through our other books. That's not going to be quite as present as we move through the other books we have planned for this kind of theme summer here. But we still do have, the follow-up here. We do have a volume 2 to get through. I think I asked this already before, though. If when you ended this first volume, if you hadn't known there was a volume 2, you would have felt satisfied, right? We talked about that early on.
Yeah, I'm totally good.
Okay, yeah. So was I. I thought this was the kind of book.
Bonus, and there's always the risk of screwing it up.
Yeah. But it was ambiguous enough with like the save yourself, that he circled there. Like, is it a message from beyond? Does it mean, that there was ambiguous? There was enough closure. Yeah,
I thought that was like a notch too much, but it was.
But to me, that's the ending of. Is there more? could there be more?
It was the dun dun dun.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean there is more, but it's like it gives
the story keeps playing out beyond the last page, and that's all you need.
It gives Nate some closure. If that's the end, if there's no more story, you see that Nate has gotten closure as a character.
Right.
Whether Ed is dead or not, the more story, he has closure, but there's still the idea of like, but maybe. So there's just enough ambiguity there, and also just enough closure. So yeah, I'm with you. I couldn't remember if we mentioned that earlier at the top of the show, but I'm with you. If it had ended there, totally fine, solid 4 issues. The fact that we get a little more and get some follow up, I already knew there was another volume when I started reading this, the first time around, but knowing that, who the team is and trusting them, looking forward to jump into the back half, the second half.
Yeah.
I guess a little more than half. It's 6 issues versus 4. So a little more than half technically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's everything from us this week. Follow us on social media. It's gonna feel terrible to say all summer.
It's gonna feel weird the longer we go on. Anytime we say that, it's gonna feel weird. But yeah, do all the things that clearly have not led to the downfall of society on social media.
You know what hasn't yet is giving podcast ratings. So do that.
Yes.
Do that.
Yeah. Do that.
But yeah, also Blue Sky is the best version of what social media could have been.
Right now,
so,
at least.
Yeah, for now, it's the best version of what it was. I'm sure that won't age poorly.
No, definitely not.
Anyway, thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, share with a friend, read along, and grab Hacktivist Volume 2. And we'll see you next week.
Peace.